Hi, everyone. Good evening, afternoon, whatever it is now. That's super dark out. So today we will be talking about weeds and integrated pest management, but I guess just waiting for folks to get in here. Does anyone want to share anything from homework review? I mean, the homework was pretty self-explanatory if you saw the lecture last week, but anything you were surprised by or any of the the savings that you found that your client or fake clients could be eligible for? Yeah, it's not the wasn't the most riveting homework, but I know a lot of you guys work for LADWP, so you're probably really familiar with the rebate programs. But if no one wants to share and there's no real questions, I'm gonna just move ahead because today there's a lot of slides about pests and conditions and diseases and stuff. So unless anyone wants to pipe up about their homework, I don't think there's not a whole ton to discuss unless you had questions or something like that. Does anyone want to mention anything about rebates? Last thing. Otherwise, I'm going to move ahead.
I have one thing.
Yeah.
My work is actually in Orange County, and I have one water district, Molten Miguel, that actually does $4 a square foot. So
Okay.
for a commercial project of almost 50,000 square feet of turf removal, theirs would pretty much pay for itself.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's an amazing thing. It is something we've been in the works talking about for about a year with this particular property, but trying to tighten up some loose ends on other projects, and then hopefully we can move on to that. But because of that extra dollar with this district, like I said, their project basically paid for. So
yeah, and I believe Martha said this, unless I heard it wrong, but did she say something also about many of the districts are actually increasing their by $1 or something, and that make sure to check with your district, and potentially LA is getting not LA, but I thought she said something about that. I don't know if you remember her mentioning that. Or maybe she remember her saying that, she was just saying generally that you should check with your district, because like you said in Orange County in this district that they're giving $4. So yeah, 3 is just for LADWP customers, but yeah, anyone who's outside of that, definitely check, because some of the other ones are giving more, which I mean, even $3 is, I know it used to be 2 back in 2018 or 2019, it was $2, and then it's gone up to 3. So yeah, it basically pays for itself sometimes if you just with that extra $1, which is rad.
Well, there's so many down here in Orange County, there's various water districts. So checking with which water district you're in, seeing what they'll give, and then what city, and then obviously the state kind of generates that. So you can usually always find it, if not like a whole $1, but maybe some other couple cents.
And also some of them even offer other rebates. So for other irrigation equipment or just planting a tree, I think I believe, is it Pasadena or Altadena? Because Altadena, I believe both of those aren't part of LADWP, if I remember correctly, but I'm not positive. But one or both of them have like a whole separate, lot of similar rebates, but then some other extras, like just planting a tree, a native tree or something like that, gives you like, I don't know, $100 or something like that. So some of them have actually totally different rebates also included, which yeah, definitely look into your specific district. What else? I'm trying to think if there was anyone else have anything like that they noticed that was kind of surprising or interesting about the homework or the rebates, or even whatever Martha talked about, maybe that you were surprised by. I think it's really cool that they're doing basically LADWP is, which they've kind of always done a bit, at least in my experience. If the grass is like yellow and like basically dead, they'll still let you apply for the rebate. It just has to be present, like they can tell it was grass. So that's actually a really cool thing, because I know several, like a lot of folks that I've talked to are like, oh, but my grass is dead, or I haven't watered it. But if it looks like there was grass there, they can also qualify. I've done several yards that basically they hadn't watered in like almost a year, and they all got the rebate, which is cool. And and Martha did mention. So anyway, I will move ahead. Like I said, there's a lot of slides today when we talk about pests. So yeah, today we'll talk about weeding and integrated pest management. Basically, it's all the kind of things that cause problems in the garden. Not all the things, but any pests, which weeds can be pests too, but we're kind of putting them in two separate little categories. And we'll talk about a little bit about weeding native plants, just as a reminder, but how to manage weeds and kind of their life cycles and how you have to deal with them in the garden. And yeah, and then we'll have several slides about kind of the most common pests and diseases and stuff that you kind of deal with native gardens. It's not an exhaustive list, but hopefully we'll get to those slides where we talk about the resources you can have access to. And then we'll talk about IPM techniques. So IPM is integrated pest management, if you guys didn't catch that. And we'll talk about kind of how that's different than your just standard pest management. So, okay, so starting with weeding. I gotta move these little boxes and things around. Okay, yeah, so weeds basically, just so we're all on the same page, weeds are just a plant that is like an unwanted plant that that you just in your garden or in your space. So it is a very relative term. So when you're weeding, you're really just removing an unwanted plant. There isn't like a category of weeds that are specifically weeds. It's just something that you don't want there. Obviously, some are more unwanted than others, but that being said, it is relative. So you want to make sure that the owner does or doesn't consider something a weed or does consider something a weed. You want to be sure about that when you're clearing someone's yard. Like, for example, this picture on the left, this is Pseudonephalium californica, which is cudweed. Also goes by, I think, cudweed everlasting or everlasting cudweed, one of those things. It is a native, but it can be very weedy, and a lot of people don't want it in their yards. So this would be an example of, a native plant, but it's kind of weedy. So typically you don't find people planting it. It just kind of is a kind of weedy native that shows up in areas. So anyway, just want to make sure that you understand that you want to be on the same page with the client about what is a weed. That being said, weeding is just a standard activity in gardening. You'll always kind of have to do some amount of it. And generally speaking, the more consistent you are, the easier and quicker it is to do it. So we've talked about that in the first couple of years, be on top of it, because it's really going to help you in the long run. And also in the long run, if you were on top of it, usually you'll see a lot of weeds go away on their own, especially if you're transitioning a garden from the conventional one to a native one. A lot of times they go away on their own because they just can't keep that. A lot of weeds are growing because we water our traditional garden is watered much more frequently, and a native garden, basically is getting that 14 inches potentially that we're used to, or a little bit more, but a lot of the weeds can't really handle that. So many of them will go away on their own. Let's see. Okay, so weed control. Sorry, I'm dry. So kind of the two, like I said, you kind of always have to weed, and you really want to stay on top of it in those first couple of years, because you don't want the weeds to get the upper hand. You want to give your native plants the upper hand, because the weeds can be very competitive and outcompete. And once they get that upper hand, it's just kind of an uphill battle. And the two factors that kind of determine if the weeds will win that upper hand are these two kind of jargonized terms: high propagule pressure and high seed mass. So high propagule pressure refers to the fact that, generally speaking, in our gardens or in our spaces, the annual weed seeds present are are tons. There's a large quantity of annual weed seeds just existing and present in the soil. So you kind of think of it as the seed bank, the weed seed bank. So generally high tropical pressure basically is just referring to you have a really full seed bank. And that is usually the case in our, in our yards and things like that. There's just a lot of weed seeds present, and they're just waiting for their triggers, which is basically sunlight, a little bit of soil disturbance, and water, which, as we've talked about, is what you're doing in that first year. So they're just waiting for their triggers, and then they, germinate. And if they are able to germinate and grow and then get to, bloom and then set seed, then we get to the high seed mass part, which basically refers to the fact that a lot of these weeds are able to produce a ton of seeds even in their short little lifespan. So then if you weren't on top of them and they actually start producing seeds, they're producing a ton of seeds. And then that adds to the high propagal pressure, AKA the seed bank. Then that higher seed bank means if you get those going, those ones, if they bloom and prosper, they produce more seeds. And it's just this cycle of the high propagal pressure and the high seed mass. And you're just adding to the weed seed bank. And you really want to break that cycle, because that's how you get the upper hand, right? So the main thing is trying to basically the main thing is weeding, but especially removing weeds before they're able to disperse their seed. That's the main part. If you're removing them after the fact, it's like not very effective because they're still shedding and dispersing their seed. So make sure if you can to weed at least before they bloom, or at least before they set there and disperse their seed. And that's all kind of like these jargonized words like high propagal pressure and high seed mass you can use to like impress people. But the like limerick version of it is that 1 year seeds, 7 years weeds, because essentially if you let those weeds produce their seed and disperse their seeds, you're really adding to that that seed bank. So you're like left with 7 years worth of seeds in terms of like the quantity of seed you're letting just like disperse itself. So that's why we really emphasize making sure to stay on top of the weeding in that first year. Also, the native plants, once you do that for the first couple years, the native plants actually get the upper hand, and they can start to outcompete the weeds, and that they start to block out, as the native plant gets larger, its own kind of vegetative canopy starts to shade the soil below it, and that is going to block out the light, so that they can start to do those things for us. And also in the next couple years, hopefully you're not disturbing the soil anymore. So then you're not bringing up new seeds. And if you're staying on top of the weeding, there's no more seeds being added, or very little being added. So yeah, that's basically the way you want to think about the life cycle of weeds and how to get ahead of them. Also, Carol Bornstein, she mentioned something in one of the earlier classes, a really good tip about weeding, which is we really have this tendency to attack like the big unruly patch of like Bermuda grass or whatever unruly weedy patch and go after that. And she said it's better to actually go off after the like newly establishing little kind of weeds that are starting to pop up in the pristine areas where you don't have a weed problem. So going after those newly establishing weeds is actually a better tactic, because of this thing, essentially this concept, of the high seed mass, is that we don't want them to get established somewhere else that they aren't already, because then that's more work and they're potentially, releasing their seeds and getting out of hand there. So we really want to break their cycle of establishment too. So she actually recommends going after all the little kind of new weedy spots or new weeds. And then you can always go back to that big unruly patch that's kind of always there that, you can always hack away at if you need to. So that's something that she mentioned that I had actually never really, oh man, sensitive mouse today. Okay, so, oh yeah, techniques for weed control. So these are just the different techniques they should all be pretty familiar with for you guys. Mechanical is essentially just anytime you physically remove a weed, pulling it, tilling it with a fork or a hoe or whatever. And generally the recommendation now is to not pull weeds, like pull them physically out of the ground, or especially if you're using like a fork or something to like, loosen up the soil around it, because that's going to disturb the soil. And not only have we talked about how that can, maybe destroy the soil structure, potentially what's it called? Disturb the soil mycorrhizal and that whole soil food web ecosystem, but it also helps bring up more seeds. So if you're like putting the fork in the soil and trying to loosen it all up, you're actually bringing a lot of seeds to the surface because of that whole high propagule pressure. So they actually don't encourage you to like till up the whole soil to remove weeds. And the newer recommendation is to clip them back down to their base. So like in this example, you leave it in the ground and you would just clip it all the way to the base of the plant. And yes, you leave the roots in the ground, and then the plant might continue to sprout, but you just keep coming back and clipping it back and back until the plant basically exhausts its reserves and its like resources and dies out. Obviously, the more invasive plants are much more difficult in doing that, and ones that have a real stronghold. But this is very effective for other weeds. So yeah, so basically you're doing the cutting back thing. That's the recommended. It's also not totally feasible in many landscapes because, you know, you can't just go clipping each little thing, each little weed. But as much as you can, try not to disturb the soil. So maybe using like a collinear hoe instead of the fork, you know, and just kind of scraping the surface. The collinear hoes are basically like a little flat plate that's at the end of a stick essentially, and you're just kind of shaving and scraping the very surface level of the soil, and then you're not digging up weeds from deep down. So that's, you know, just trying to not disturb the soil as much as you can when you're weeding. Then there's a cultural technique for weeding. Cultural weeding techniques are just referring to anything where you're maintaining conditions so that weeds are less likely to be established. And generally with this situation, that would mean mulch, you know, because the mulch basically smothers out the weeds and they can't grow underneath it. You're blocking out the light, and they're also kind of just smothering them. So it's always important to have that good 3-inch depth so that it actually works and smothers out the weeds and blocks the light. If you just kind of sprinkle mulch on top, it's not enough, and they'll just sprout through it. So it doesn't actually protect or help you in your aims with weeding. And also cultural things can be just, in terms of weeding, can be watering appropriately. So not overwatering. You might, when you water more, you might just be creating a niche and a resource for weeds to thrive. So making sure you're just watering the plants you want to water and not just overwatering all over. Then there is soil solarization. This is a technique that typically you would use before you plant out a garden. So something that you maybe want to, solarize the whole area. You could do like maybe a little patch spot, maybe like a Bermuda grass spot, but typically you want to do it before. It's difficult to do around plants. And that's because essentially what you're doing is first you clear all the vegetation around the site, like wherever site you're working at. And then you want to actually water it really well, like at least 6 to 8 inches down. So water it really good. And then you cover it with some kind of, clear plastic, like some UV resistant clear plastic, and then seal it really well. And that can be with staples, like landscape staples, or just soil, mounded up all around. So it's really nice and kind of airtight. I mean, I guess they're not airtight, but just sealed really tightly. So it can't, there's not a bunch of flow. And the idea is that you cover it and then you just let it sit for a month or two, maybe 2 months, 2 to 3 months. But basically you want to do it during the hottest months of the year so that you actually cook the seeds. The idea is you're kind of steaming them. If you do this same method, but do it dry and you don't water it prior to, it's a lot less effective. So make sure that you do water it so it's actually kind of like really steaming it and making it unlivable for weed seeds. Wait, was there something else I was going to say about that? No.
I have a question about that. Like, does that also, like, the solarization, like, destroy like all the life in the soil that's good for plants?
That's why also you want to, it's a good point. It's another reason you want to do it prior to planting, but generally speaking, it doesn't kill everything. It's not like an antibiotic, and it kind of just, it might, kill some things, but generally speaking, what you're doing after you plant out is trying to create like a good habitat, put the mulch down so that it can repopulate, like that soil community can repopulate with all the good beneficial kind of soil organisms, if that makes sense. So that is why you would do it prior to, so that you're not potentially like cooking up the soil food system, or sorry, the soil food web. But also a lot of those organisms actually have really large ranges of temperatures that they can handle, and they aren't like the weed seeds. So you know, for sure some of them make it, and for sure some of them are affected by it, but generally speaking it's really only kind of like really getting that first couple inches anyway. And it's not like I said, it's not an antibiotic. It's not really like that what's the word, like effective in terms of like killing everything, if that makes sense. But yes, there is that possibility of kind of like maybe your soil community food web takes a hit. But if you are in the process of transitioning your garden, like from grass or something to that, then it kind of makes sense to do it, because you probably don't have a very good soil food web existing if you have like grass or a bunch of weeds already before you plant your natives, if that makes sense. Okay, so chemical, you know, there's always chemical options with weeding. This is something, well, I guess I should clarify, there are chemical ones that are herbicides, like the synthetic ones that we kind of think of, but there's also chemical ones like vinegar. So when really chemical in general, like we're referring to the synthetic ones, but I will talk a little bit about the more kind of like organic DIY ones. But in terms of herbicides, like the synthetic ones, many of you probably know that they're usually a lot of the popular ones have glyphosate in them, which is detrimental to animal life, including us. So we want to avoid them. And because basically native plants are about creating wildlife and habitat. So it kind of is not helping in our aim, right? And mostly, well, I should say too, if you are using it, so you're using it as a last resort because it's an extreme situation, you also want to apply it as selectively as possible if you are using it. So you have some weed, but you don't want to just spray your whole space with that, or water it in everywhere if it's not necessary. You want to apply these chemical herbicides really selectively so that it makes the least impact on the rest of the kind of community. And an extreme example might be, something like crabgrass or a Bermuda grass that's kind of entwined and entangled in the roots or the base of a plant, and it's really difficult for you to get that out. In that case, you would even if you were to use a chemical control, I would say, like with a gloved hand, of course, like, dip that hand in some herbicide and then just like kind of run your hand along the crabgrass, and just so that you're actually getting the herbicide on the plant you want to kill, as opposed to like all of the plants around. So even in the way you apply it, it would be very selective. So that would be an extreme case. Also, some folks do what is kind of called, there's like pre-emergent herbicides, which essentially kill germinating seeds, or don't allow them to germinate, or right after germination, they basically, the plant dies. And so these pre-emergent herbicides need to be watered in when you're utilizing them. And this should make sense with what we talked about, how in the, I believe the soil class, and how water is what basically moves nutrients throughout the soil. You need water to move nutrients. You also need water a lot of the times to actually, for these herbicides to work, because that's how the plant uptakes it. And I'm not, like I said, I try to not encourage herbicide use, but some people like to use them also kind of like instead of the solarizing technique, where you want to remove all the weed seeds in an area, you might do what's like dead bedding, which is essentially like removing the vegetation and then watering in this pre-emergent herbicide, so that whatever seeds come up are all kind of killed before you plant out. And of course, yes, that's going to kill whatever seeds present, and that's not that great to put that into your soil. However, it does break down. Usually it breaks down within 3 to 4 months, a lot of the herbicides. So you'd want to make sure to time that appropriately, so that you're not leaving it in the ground or applying it within the time frame that you might want to put wildflowers down, for instance, because wildflowers are germinating and they will be affected by a pre-emergent herbicide. So the dead bedding is basically to clear an area, a lot like the soil solarization technique. And you water it in, they try to sprout, and that kind of kills them all. And then you can plant out. And so the idea with that though too is, like I was saying to the question earlier, is you're essentially like kind of clearing the space and for being able to put all the plants in, the mulch and everything, so that then it can kind of rehabilitate the space, or what's the word, like reintroduce the beneficial organisms and beneficial like microbiome and all that. So there is kind of like there you can see it as, if you need to use an herbicide, how to limit it or what times to use it. So if you're doing it at the very beginning of the garden, maybe it's not as big of a deal as doing it once the garden is established, because once it's established, you maybe have a more developed soil food web. Was there something else I was going to say? Oh, I was mentioning about the vinegar or the botanical oils or something like that. So some folks like to use those on weeds. Typically, these work on younger plants. So smaller, younger, less established weeds. And they typically need like bright sun and hot weather. These you're not watering in. If you're applying like horticultural vinegar or some kind of horticultural oil that is going to burn the plant, you want to apply it when there's bright sun and hot temperatures, so it kind of burns the weed. But so that's why they're not so effective on the coast, because we don't really have that like high temp and high high sun. It's a lot more mild on the coast. So maybe in the desert situation, they're probably more effective, these kind of like vinegars and things like that. And also they're not very effective on a very invasive and established weed. Like if you have a whole section of crabgrass, like forget it, like vinegar and stuff is not going to do anything to it. So yeah, that's chemical. Then lastly, just natives as weeds, they can be weedy. This is true because we're saying weeds, it's just kind of a relative term. So anything can fall in that category. And I think this is really the important part to remember here, is that concept of planting the right plant for the right place. And because if it's the wrong plant for that space, that's when you might be creating a weedy situation. For example, like Bromnea coulteri, which is the Matalia poppy, it spreads by rhizomes, which are these like little lateral growths under the ground or in the soil. And it wants to grow that way. It wants to spread out. And if you plant it in a space that's very restricted, then you're basically creating a weed issue where you have to cut that back or remove it very often when the plant wants to spread out. So it can be avoided sometimes if you just plant it in the right spot. But a lot of our rhizomatous species can become quite weedy because of this, this feature, which is, for example, also the epilobium, which is here on the right. This photo, that's California fuchsia, also grows by rhizomes. So does yarrow, and all of those can potentially be weedy because of this like spreading nature that they have. So something you want to just keep in mind when you're planting, of course. Like if you don't want something to spread out, or if you don't want something spreading, maybe this isn't the right plant for the space. But also they don't have to be rhizomatous. California poppies can be considered weedy. They seed very freely and just can come up in large numbers if there's water. And so they can also become a weed. It's just, again, about picking the right plant. And typically a lot of our natives are not, they're pretty easy to remove. They're not, they're much easier to control than any kind of invasive weed. But that being said, they can be weedy and be an issue. There's some, Eriogonum species. So the buckwheats, they also are free seeders. These are very easy to control, but you'll see them sprout up if there's enough, like in a good rainy year, they'll kind of sprout up everywhere, but super easy to like kind of remove easily with a collinear hoe or whatever. And there's some other examples here like Oenthera, which is the evening primrose, or Cicerentium, the blue-eyed grass. And so just knowing that, native plants can also be weedy. It's not, they're not like, innocent in this whole weed game.
What does REI mean? I see that on the notes, REI for pre-emergent herbicides.
Oh, that refers to re-entry interval. I believe that's, re-entry interval is like the it's referring to how much time when herbicides are used, it's like how much time you need to leave before, sorry, not leave. Yeah, basically leave. Like how much time after applying the herbicide to when, you can move around it and your pets and things like that can move around it. So re-entry intervals are usually like 3 to, you want to have short ones, usually like 3 to 4 hours. So that means you apply it and you don't enter the space again for 3 to 4 hours. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, so integrated pest management. Now we're going to talk about more kind of the critters and diseases and things like that. Integrated pest management refers to, or in shorthand is IPM. I'll probably just call it IPM this whole time. We'll talk about how we use IPM with native plants. It's basically an ecosystems. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, it's an ecosystems-based strategy that's focused on long-term prevention of pests or whatever their damage is through combining a lot of different techniques that we're going to talk about. And the idea is really to like, because it's kind of taking this holistic approach to the health of the ecosystem. It's not thinking about like, okay, I have this plant, I don't want this pest on it. Okay, what do I do about it? It's thinking about, okay, I have a whole garden, a whole ecosystem here with a lot of different organisms that live in it, not just the plants. And I need to take that into account before I make some kind of a decision about how I want to handle or manage a pest. So it's very much thinking about the whole habitat. And that makes sense because, or that goes very well with native plants, because one of the big parts of native plants is their, native gardens. One of the big kind of like selling points is that they support habitat and wildlife. And wildlife is everything, not like just mountain lions. It's like insects and everything. So we want to utilize a strategy when we're dealing with pests that is taking all of those things into account. So usually IPM is going to go with like the lowest impact, the lowest toxic or the least toxic strategy when dealing with a pest. So that's what we're referring to when we say IPM or integrated pest management. This was developed by the UCs, and actually no, I don't think it was developed by the UCs. I can't speak for that actually, but I do know the UCs they support it and they have all the resources on integrated pest management. And basically all of the things that we'll have a website later that we can kind of show you, that is the UC's integrated pest management website. And it's a really good resource because it's going to kind of tell you all the least toxic strategies to use, but also all of the strategies that they have and recommendations for how to deal with some issue they're all going to be like environmentally friendly and scientifically sound, or the most environmentally friendly or scientifically sound that we have resources for or we have studied. So the goal is always to be the least kind of cause the least detrimental damage or whatever, least damage to like all the beneficial insects in the whole community. And yeah, you do actually have in your class, your what's it called? Your class outline, there is the website there for the UCIPM website, because that is going to be the resource. It's not like you're going to remember all of these things, all these pests and stuff on one lecture. It's really about knowing where the resources are and how to use them. So IPM is really the standard, and it's really just the environmentally friendly pest management solution. So there's also this concept of like threshold or action level with IPM, and it's really about when do you do something about a pest or its damage that it's causing? Like at what point do you even do something, because, and is it even necessary? Because again, you want to take into account this whole habitat. You really want to know like at what point does it really matter for this garden? And this is something you might have to determine for each garden, that each garden might be different. Even the same garden, but the back and the front yard might be different. Maybe there's an HOA and they really care about the way it looks visually, but the backyard doesn't matter. And this is something that's very much determined by each situation. And also something that's not just about like the looks of it, but also like the temporal aspect of their threshold is potentially you can just leave a pest, say, or maybe you see it happening, and maybe is it possible for you to just not do anything for a certain amount of time, maybe a whole season, and let the natural predators and beneficial insects show up. So sometimes you have to kind of let the pest population build up so that it's actually a food source for somebody else, and they actually show up and take care of your problem. So that's another kind of thing to keep in mind with the threshold and kind of action level. It's just about kind of changing your frame of reference for what is a pest. And a lot of times I just think, of damage as just evidence of a real habitat. Damage on plants is just us seeing the habitat being used by all of the different wildlife in it. And also I kind of think about it personally. I know I have a vegetable gardening background, and the way I always kind of approached it is like a certain tax. I pay my taxes so that things function, and there's roads and blah, 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 and all the things. And I think of it the same way with, our gardens, which is like, I'm willing to pay this level of tax to nature for allowing her to use our space and her space, and that's cool with me. And once it's beyond that tax, then I'm going to have a problem, and then I might start to like implement some kind of pest management. So if that tax level you've determined is 25%, and if there's 25% damage on the plants, I'm cool with that because that's the tax I pay. But if maybe your tax level is lower or higher, it's just up to the client or the gardener. Okay, so there is also, wait, I should check the time. Oh, okay, we're doing good. Let's see. Okay, so, oh wait, I see in the chat, John says I have lots of lacewings and so yeah, these are both, he says he has lots of lacewings and lady beetles. Basically, these are both beneficial insects that come and show up and take care of the pests that we have in our gardens. And they actually, like lady beetles eat the larvae of the lady beetles eat tons of aphids. So do the lady beetles, but their larvae eat even more. And they kind of take care of these populations. So if you have a garden that's happy and healthy and has these beneficial insects in it, sometimes that's all you need, and you don't have to worry about the damage. It's just kind of like nature's a bit slower to kind of take care of the problem. Okay, so when IPM has all these like very rigid kind of categories and things like that, the way they talk about things. So I have to go through all of them. But essentially when you're IDing like what is happening, what's the cause of some health problem in a plant, you want to, they have these kind of 4 categories, but of basically what causes plant problems. And one of them is just environmental causes. Like, is this an issue where you have something like light could be an issue, which is like maybe you have a plant that wants to be in the sun in full shade, or vice versa. And that's just you not planting the right plant for the right place. And they're struggling. This plant is stressed out because it's not in its preferred situation. So a lot of times our pest problems are happening because the plant is just stressed, and we might be creating those conditions or not. But essentially, yeah, the environmental causes would be things like that, like just it's in the wrong environment, potentially with light. Maybe weather is, obviously weather should be an obvious one. There could be anything from like seasonal changes where you have some migratory pest that shows up. There's like a bagrata bug that shows up and eats all the brassica crops in summer, and that's a migratory kind of well, I guess it's not a migratory one, but you could have a migratory pest. But bagrata is just a seasonal pest, and there are just simply the seasons in that weather. But obviously there's also like drought and storms, and even as our climate crisis kind of continues to worsen, we're going to see more vacillation between extreme weather events. So that's probably going to affect our native plants and our gardens, but also just anything extraordinary, which could be a fire, could be a cold snap, heat wave, Santa Anas, all of those things. These can all be potentially causes for stress on the plant that might be a health problem. So that's one cause, let's say. And then a second kind of category that they use are cultural causes, which would be, honestly, most cultural causes would be, I'd say the big one is overwatering. That's one of the main things that kills native plants is overwatering. So that's cultural causes are anything where humans are creating the problematic conditions, right? So overwatering would be our fault. And it could also be things like spacing, maybe you planted the plants too close together. Also, there's use and abuse and kind of on and off site issues, which could be something like just having a traffic corridor but next to the plants or on top of the roots of like oak trees, for example. Maybe somebody's like parking their car all the time, driving over the roots of an oak tree. That could be problematic, that could stress the plant. That doesn't mean it's going to kill it, but it could stress it and, make it more susceptible to whatever issues are around. And on and offsite issues can just be, I don't know, anything from like your neighbors doing new construction and there's dust all over your plants to their sprinklers on their lawn spray over onto your native plants and actually end up overwatering the edge plants or something. So of course there's cultural causes because we make problems too. And then there are just pests, which are just kind of, right now we're just going to categorize them as vertebrate and invertebrate. So the bigger ones would be like, anything with a vertebrae. Like this could be anything from gophers to skunks to, your pets, kids, people, whatever, this is any kind of big pest, deer, things like that. And then there's the invertebrates, which are, kind of like all the critters, all the kind of like snails, ants, whatever, but also remember that in this category of invertebrate pests, a lot of insects are part of what we consider wildlife. So you want to make sure it's truly a pest and it's causing problems in your garden, as opposed to just being like part of the plant, part of the garden community, right? What did I have here? Okay, the last category they kind of use as a cause of plant health problems is just disease in general, right? And generally that's something that's caused by a virus or a bacteria or a fungi or something. And this should be pretty obvious, but all plant material, just all of it is susceptible to disease. Like nobody is not susceptible. They're all susceptible to disease. It's really just about them having their immune system be as tip top as possible via not being in a stressed out situation. So you want to plant the right plant for the right place, but also avoid creating conditions where you're increasing their susceptibility to XYZ disease. So that's something to keep in mind, is that just like us, if our immune system, if we're experiencing stress, our immune systems are compromised. So that's the same for the plants. We really want to give them the best opportunity to actually deal with whatever kind of disease or anything that they face, any of the pests or anything like that. So one thing though to know is these diseases and viruses, bacteria, they just exist in the environment. And usually the closer the plant material is to its original habitat, the less likely it'll have problems. And that's because, again, they've evolved to this area, or if it's very localized, if you have a hyper local garden, they've evolved to that space, they've evolved to that soil, evolved to that weather, microclimate, even potentially the diseases and pests that are around. So they're the most comfortable and capable of dealing with any kind of disease and pest pressure. So those ones are the least susceptible, we'd say. Whereas if you have something exotic from somewhere else, they're probably going to have more issues with a disease, or even ones that are outside of their natural range. Maybe it's a California native, but it's from Humboldt County or something. So generally, the more localized the plant is to the zone that you're planting in, the kind of less susceptible it is. And then just kind of a note on symptoms versus disease. I think all of us coming out of like more than a year in a global pandemic should know this kind of concept, but essentially the symptom isn't the disease. And sometimes you can have the same symptoms for different diseases. So as you guys know, like I said, with the pandemic happening, if you could have a symptom of a fever, that doesn't mean necessarily that you have COVID. The COVID's the disease and the virus, but your body, the symptom is just the physical or visual thing that you're seeing that is, what is the word I'm looking for? It's just a visible effect of the disease. That's what a symptom is. So that's why it's hard when people are like, hey, I have this, here's just a picture of a yellow leaf. It's like, that's just a symptom. That doesn't tell us the whole picture about what's happening to be able to decide what disease is even happening, if it is a disease. So yeah, you want to, I guess it's just a reminder to note all the symptoms that are present when you are investigating some kind of disease. I see that there's some things in the chat. I have a lot of snails in my front yard. Okay, John is answering. Good. I like you guys doing. Okay, you guys are taking care of it. Great. There's also a product called Sluggo, I believe, and it's like I'm trying to remember what it is organic, and I'm trying to remember if it's like boric acid based or if it's, I can't remember, but there is a product called Sluggo for slugs and snails that works really well. Okay, I'm gonna remove the chat again because it's very distracting for me. Okay, what next? Oh, we're talking about disease. So also, so this is a plant pathology triangle. This is just a good reminder that you need all three of these factors for disease to actually develop. So you need a susceptible host, which would be our plant, a specific plant, right? You need the pathogen to actually be present, and then you need favorable conditions for that pathogen to infect that host, right? And create disease. If you just have two of the three, you don't have disease. So that's always important to remember. You know, something like there's like Armillaria root rot, which is basically a fungus, yes. And it's usually found in coast live oak, or it usually affects coast live oak and Catalina ironwood. So if I know I had Armillaria root rot pathogen or this root fungus in my soil, I'd be like, okay, I have the pathogen. Do I have a susceptible host in my garden? Do I actually have Catalina ironwood or coast live oak in my garden? If not, then I don't need to worry about it. If maybe I do have the susceptible host and the pathogen, I also need to create the favorable conditions, which usually with root rot is overwatering and watery and poor drainage situations. So if I know I have that pathogen, I want to be very careful about watering, so I'm not creating the conditions where like we get the whole, the three factors hitting and then having the disease. So you really do have to have all three. And if you don't, if you just have the pathogen in your soil, but there's no plant that's affected by it, then there's no concern, or any of the combinations of just two as opposed to the three. Okay, again, IPM likes to be very categorical and methodical about dealing with plant pests, which I applaud and understand. But essentially, so they have this, because we're saying that there's many symptoms that look the same, but might be different, indicate different problems, different diseases, different pests. You do want to make sure you're describing the whole, the plant health problem in a whole way, not just saying, hey, the leaves are dropping off. We need to know the whole picture. And sometimes if you might see one thing, like there's, like I said, the leaves are falling off, but you need to kind of address all the different issues when you're investigating damage or describing it to someone who maybe you want to get an answer from. And this is they do it in this kind of form of first the whole plant. You want to make sure that, think about is this affecting the whole plant? But B, what part of the life cycle is this plant? Is it a germinating plant? Is it established? Is it new? What is it establishing? What period of the life cycle is it? And of course you want to also indicate what is what's happening with the plant, what's affecting the whole plant. Maybe you water it in this way, things that also affect the whole plant that are practices that you are doing, and then you move down to the kind of components of the plant. So the main stem, the branches, is this health issue affecting them? Just the stem, or maybe just dieback. For example, on manzanitas, maybe you're having branch dieback. That's pretty common symptom on a manzanita for several different things, but could be overwatering, could be this, could be that. So definitely finding out, okay, where is it affecting now? Is it just the branches? Is it just this? Is it just that? And then next, the leaves, so foliage. And is it just the leaves? And then what is it? Is it are the leaves deformed? Are they yellow, but also have this stippling on them? Do they also have frass on them? Like all the things that you're seeing on the leaf, not just maybe the main one that you noticed. And then lastly, there's flower and fruit. So are the flowers growing normally? Are they blooming at the right time of year, or the season that you would expect? Are they deformed? And then if it has a conspicuous fruit, is the fruiting pattern normal? Basically that. So that's what IPM require like they suggest you do, and it does give you a much large kind of holistic picture of what's going on, so you can identify the pest more accurately, and then do whatever you have to do after you've identified the pest appropriately. Okay, then you have to identify the pest, and then you have these IPM solutions. So what do you do based off of whatever you've identified as the problem? And they, again, categorize them into these 4 different categories. And they have biological control, which is just anytime you're using, natural enemies, predators, parasites, any kind of things that you're introducing that would control the pest and their damage. So these are kind of like, this could be like the picture shows, like ladybugs for aphids. It can be, also you can buy all sorts of different beneficial insects, lacewings you can buy. You can, also there's products like Nematode, which is a nematode that goes after the ant queens, especially with like Argentine ants, which are an invasive and aggressive ant species. So you can have biological controls. That's also can go for like, just like owls in a barn box, you know what I mean? That an owl box that controls your gopher population or something. So yeah, it's a big category. And then another category is cultural controls, which similar to the weed thing, but this is now for just pests we're talking about and all the other critters. Cultural controls are things that just are going to reduce the pest's ability to establish itself or reproduce or survive or disperse itself. And this can be just us changing our own irrigation practices, as I've talked about. Overwatering, underwatering, maybe not watering in the summer. A lot of our natives are, not a lot, but several of them are sensitive to summer water, like Bromnea coulteri, Fremonodendron, oaks. A lot of our oaks are sensitive to that. What else? There's lots of manzanitas are also pretty sensitive. So just, maybe not watering in the summertime. That's a cultural control. That's something that we can do to reduce the likelihood of root rot or any kind of soil-like diseases. Also, it could just be like the spacing of plants. Like this picture here on the right, I know it's small, but this is like, I know this is like a buckwheat. This is like a California buckwheat, and this is a California buckwheat. And if this is kind of a standard 2-foot pathway, this is not very much spacing between the plants. This is actually very tight spacing, I would say. And sometimes when you create really tight spacing, you're kind of encouraging the conditions for fungal stuff, like if it's mildews or whatever. So it could just also be your plant spacing. If you're not spacing things appropriately and giving enough airflow around the plants, you are creating the conditions for some kind of disease. Or overhead watering, if you have mildews growing on the leaves or powdery mildew or something like that, if you're doing overhead watering, you might want to either plant something that's not sensitive to overhead watering, or not do overhead watering on plants that are sensitive to that sort of thing. So cultural controls are those sort of things. There's mechanical and physical controls, which is just pretty obvious, but any kind of physical control that's going to like block or kill whatever pest or make the environment kind of unsuitable for them. And that could be, I think mostly I think of just traps, like a gopher trap, mouse traps, rodent, things like that. These are physically blocking the animal or killing it from getting to whatever, plant or plant that you don't want it to. But it could also be, it could be like gopher baskets too. Gopher baskets, people plant in those to, block gophers from eating the roots and things like that. Trying to think if that could be any kind of mesh or anything you put over. I think that works more for, I'm thinking more of vegetables, but, and then lastly, there's chemical controls, which again, should be your last resort. And you should, if you are using it, it should be very selective, and you don't want to be putting these toxins all over your environment. So be very selective and very choosy, and choosy about when and where you're going to use it. because it is going to end up affecting the rest of the organisms in that garden. So you are potentially, so if you're not being selective about it, it can. So you want to just make sure it is your last resort. And also when you're using chemical controls, use them in combination with other control methods so that you actually have an effective long-term solution. And that's what IPM really suggests. If you are using a chemical control, you should be doing the other things too, the mechanical ones, the biological controls, and all the cultural stuff too, not just resorting to the chemical solution. Okay, let's see. I will check the chat real quick because I see there's a bunch of things. I'm sure you guys love it. Yes, you guys are talking about the kind of like, yes, I've used these type of things like serrano, garlics, things like that, chili powder and things in a vegetable garden situations. And yeah, they can be effective. And I've also done them where you kind of ferment them. I mean, I wouldn't call it a true fermentation, but just get them like real nasty. And that has been effective too. We'll get into it, I guess, in the next ones. But Natasha, you asked about Dawn. I'm not sure if it was for I would say I was just going to mention though, there is like insecticidal soaps that they sell, but you can use any kind of mild soap, just a few drops in water, and just use that for a lot of different soft-bodied insects like aphids and mealybugs, scale, things like that. So soap can be a really effective tool for pests, and especially like low toxin. Okay, great. Yeah, love it. Hector's got like a whole recipe. This is good. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, let's do a break before we get into the different pest conditions. Let's just, let's meet back here at, let's say 6:02. Don't want to give us too much time. Let's do 6:02. We'll do a break for 5-6 minutes. And then we'll come back here and we'll talk about the actual different pests and diseases that we encounter with native plants. So break, and we'll be back here at 6:02.
Hi, Claire, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to know if like, are we gonna have to take a final or a test to pass this class?
I wish. There is not one.
Okay.
Good question. Yeah, but there's no final test. It's based off of your attendance and like engagement and a little bit of homework, but it's mostly based off of attendance. So
What about homework? Because like I missed the first few homeworks.
yeah, basically if you've done like, half of them, that's fine. But I don't want to say that out loud because I want you guys to do them all. And but yeah, it doesn't really affect whether or not you get, the attendance is the main thing that they what's it called, they utilize for the actual getting the certificate. Not, unfortunately, I feel like there should be a test, but
Well, I'm so glad there's not a test.
yeah,
I'm taking college classes and it sucks. Okay.
no, true, that's true. I think somebody else had a big test today, and so I totally understand, like, I am not the focus of the world, so I totally get it. And yeah, no, it's mostly just attendance. And that being said, actually, that reminds me, so next week is the last week of classes. We only have the 2 left. And there is the pruning workshop after the final class on Saturday. So our final Friday class will be followed Saturday by that pruning workshop, which there is an Eventbrite link or Evite, what is it? I don't know. There's a link though in that first email that Brenda sent out to you guys. And that's if you want to take the optional, totally optional, that one won't affect your certificate, but a really good pruning workshop, and like really recommend it, like I did the irrigation one, but I'm not sure who's teaching it this time around, but I think it's a great one, and everybody always is like, oh, so helpful. So if you can make it, try to.
Okay, thank you, Lou. I just want to say this class is like 100 times more enjoyable than my chemistry class.
Nice. That makes me feel good. I feel good that I'm like better than the chemistry.
Is there a possibility to take these classes in the future, like when the next cohort comes through, if we weren't able to attend one of them?
Oh, like if you missed one, you should be, you know, I think you should ask Brenda about that. And I can't see why they would say no, to like, if you wanted to just see one of the, one of the lectures that you missed. I believe though, you should be receiving, the recordings of this class. So if you did
Oh,
miss
for like
one-
the pruning class.
Oh, I see. So for the optional in-person ones.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm sure they would make like an exception. Like I feel like they would, but they haven't like told me that that's the way they do it, and I haven't seen that happen. But I imagine you could probably ask for that, in the next round, and ask like, hey, can I attend it? They also do offer these workshops via Theodore Payne. They do offer the pruning workshop 101 for like, a pretty low fee for the public. So that is it. It's the same one. So if you do miss it and you can make one of those, that's also an option. But yeah, I would actually ask Brenda about it, and maybe because she'll know when the next cohort is coming, and she might be able to add you on. I do know the one thing that they are concerned about is numbers, because they try to have the 2 different sessions and have no more than 10 people for social distancing and whatnot. So if the next cohort is very large, I would say your probability is lower. But for example, this cohort is actually the smallest one I've taught before. And there's only like 25 total, even though I think we've gotten down to a little bit less. So yeah, that would definitely depend. But Brenda's a better person to contact about that.
Thanks.
Hey Claire, I got a question. What do you think about releasing ladybugs when there's
Uh,
like a lot of aphids?
I personally, I found the soap more helpful, especially because I feel like it's that thing where you have to have like a good buffet for them to want to stick around. And that's hard for us to know. Like maybe for us, we're like, that's a lot of aphids, but the ladybugs are like, not enough for me. And then they just peace out. So I sometimes think like, or I find that the soap method, so the kind of just the water and a little bit of a couple drops of soap, and kind of pouring that over the aphids and mushing it in and kind of smashing them around, and doing that like, once a week or every 10 days until the population goes down. That's, I find, really effective. Also the kind of like, I combine that with like just a really strong like jet of water from the hose, just spray them off, because they actually don't crawl back up. Like the aphids don't, they're not that.
Oh, they just die when they fall down?
Yeah, it's surprising. I didn't know that until recently. But I kind of spraying their asses off and then soaping them, and then it's like, I feel like that is, for me, easier, because I've had it where the ladybugs just like, it's fun at first and they just fly away. I feel like it's almost like a marketing thing, but that's just my experience. What about Hector, your the garlic and chili, that one, what have you used that on?
I've mostly used them on roses. Like white roses, they get a lot of aphids.
Yeah.
Pretty much work. And this one commercial property that we do, I did both. I planted the sages and I released what's it called? The ladybugs.
Yeah.
And been 2 years, no aphids.
Oh, so it's been effective. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so is it? You said it's a commercial property. So is there a lot? There's a lot of like plants for them to kind of have aphids on to feed off of.
Yeah, they're still there.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any aphids.
Yeah. Then I mean, see, I think it's like, if it works, it works, because that also might be because it is a commercial property. There's so many plants, so that means there's a lot more like wild habitat for not only the aphids to be there, but then the ladybugs to be there too.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's really cool to hear that.
And I put them right there in the entrance, and it like smells lovely.
Nice, cool. Sage and the roses. Yeah, that would smell good.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so it's 6:04. I'm gonna get into all the different pests. It's gonna be a bunch of just like photos and me talking as usual. So sorry to you guys. We'll start with kind of like biggest to smallest. Oops, there we go. Yeah, so we talked about vertebrates a little bit, or we mentioned that them, and I think the main vertebrate, I think the most common one, I guess, I would say is gophers. Of course, this is counts for like deer, can be cats, skunks, possum, all the things are, rats, all the things count as vertebrates. But I think the ones that truly affect the plants are really gophers. And typically they go after the roots. These are pocket gophers. They basically go after the roots of plants. And, if you've ever seen it, it just like is a dead thing above, and then you pull it out and they've munched the roots. So they typically go after tap roots. So they like a nice tap root that's like, looks like a little carrot or something. So California poppy has a nice taproot. So does Sphaerolaceae ambigua, the apricot mallow, has a nice taproot that they might go after. But honestly, they have a preference, like they prefer taproots, but they'll go after anything, like in a pinch. If there is no taproot around, they'll eat lots of stuff. So I don't feel like that they'll save you by just not planting plants that don't have taproots. So. But with gophers, we say typically to use some kind of trap. Any kind of chemical or rodenticide or anything like that is problematic and not ecologically minded, because essentially any raptors or predators of these gophers, if they eat the poisoned gopher, then you're actually affecting other organisms down the chain. So we recommend trapping. The cinch trap is this one down here on the right hand corner. You basically like stick it in and it just like, you set it and it essentially just like snaps on the neck of the, I don't know if that's too graphic for people. I have a really high gross tolerance, so I don't mind talking about that kind of stuff. But I also use like the Victor trap, and I find trapping to be really effective. There's some tricks with gophers, but I think it's the most effective way, I guess, unless you have, like a cat who's really good at hunting. But trapping is the way to go with these guys. What else is there? Yeah, I can give a lot of tips on gopher trapping. I feel like I've said this before to other classes, but you guys, this is like my hidden talent. This is like my secret talent, is like really good gopher trapper. Like I don't know when it's ever gonna do anything for me, but aside from in the garden. But shit, if you guys need help with that, we can just talk about it in the Q&A, because I have a lot of tips. Okay, so yeah, so there's vertebrates. I think also I want to just mention, there's like, here they mentioned cats as a factor. Cats aren't really gonna like do anything to your plants. They're they get a bad rap in this slide. It's mostly just because they are affecting other organisms in the ecosystem, right? So like birds and lizards and things like that, they're hunting those. So they're here because CNPS also helped us with this. They're really advocating for wildlife within your garden. So cats obviously are hunters, so they can, destroy that kind of situation. But that being said, maybe keeping them inside or catios or cool catwalks is always an option. Okay, so then there's just insects. Obviously, there's a million types of insects. There's tons, and this is not to try to like identify each insect, more so to just remember that insects are also considered part of wildlife. When we talk about wildlife, it's not just like mountain lions and bobcats. It's also little parasitoid species and leafcutter bees and things like that. So here in this photo is these leaves have these like kind of circular cuts out of them. And that's evidence of the leafcutter bee, which is a native solitary, non-stinging bee that lives in the soil. And it kind of tunnels into the soil and actually uses these little cutout leaf parts and lines their tunnels and kind of wraps and nests their little larvae within these leaf kind of packages. So it's kind of a really cool feature when you see it. Somebody who didn't know would just be like, oh, something's eating my leaves, they'd be mad about it or something. But in this case, it's really cool because it's really just like evidence of like a bee doing her thing. And it's just like, evidence of a habitat dweller. So it can also be an opportunity to educate either a client or your crew or whoever about the fact that this native garden is showing that there is evidence of a habitat dweller here. So that's just something to keep in mind with the insect issue. with in terms of insects as a pest, I would say. And also, like we were talking about in the chat and a little bit before, sometimes letting the insect pressure or the pest or whatever, like aphids, letting them go, and just let them do their thing so that the population builds up, so that maybe the predator, the natural predator, shows up on its own. So maybe letting them kind of battle it out themselves sometimes is a possibility, especially given, again, this goes back to the threshold level, but if the client really like values the wildlife aspect of their garden, maybe that would be where you're like, okay, well, we don't really have to do anything this season. Let's see if it takes care of itself. And also, like, I've seen birds very small birds take care of aphid populations, like bush tits and the like orange-crowned warbler. Also, I'll see it just like on there cleaning the little aphids off. I mean, they do like a half cleaning job, but still, it's like they keep the population at control. And again, I'm the level that I'm okay with is like, yeah, a little bit of aphids on that is okay with me. So I like, just leave them, and then the birds kind of keep them under control, I guess I should say. Okay, then there are Argentine ants is a invasive ant. I mentioned it earlier. This is these are actually these have this like really cool story. I think I heard a podcast about it, and these invasive Argentine ants are actually in this, like, they form these like mega colonies that are like half the state of California size, and they actually are at war with the California harvester ant, which is our native ant. And apparently there's like some border in Escondido where they like have this like frontline trench warfare, and like 30 million of them die a year. I know I sound like a crazy person when I explain it, but it's true. And they are an invasive ant, and that's not really, I guess that's not that important for the class, but it's just a cool factoid. And these are not those fire ants. They're not the biting ones. They're not the ones that you're seeing in your kitchen all the time. These are different, and they don't bite. And essentially what they do is they aggressively protect their kind of farm operation, which is they protect aphids and scale, I should say. So scale is this picture here. This is actually a little insect that is kind of hard shelled. And the aphids, as you guys know, both of them suck the sap out of the plant. But what they do is they exude this, they kind of produce this scale, and aphids, they produce like a sugary honeydew. That's what the ants are after, and that's what they're farming. So they actually, use that sugary honeydew kind of exudate that the aphids and scale produce. And so they protect their kind of crop of scale and aphid. So not only the reason they're problematic is the ants are problematic is because they're protecting these aphids and scale all over the plant, which is sucking the life force out of the plant. And they're not letting anything get in the way and control it. So if a lady beetle tried to show up and eat an aphid that was under control of an Argentine ant community, they take that ladybug out. So you basically get more and more pressure than you normally would from the aphid and scale. But also they like to put it along the plant sides, but also along the base of the plant, and even along the roots of the plant. So they're removing a lot of soil and loosening the soil, planting all of these like aphids and scale along the roots. And so they actually can kind of like dry out the plant also. And in addition, the ants, they eat the kind of small fleshy seed part or seed attachments for a lot of different weeds like belt grass and spurge and purslane and even like chickweed. So you might see a lot of those weeds right around the base of a plant where they're kind of farming aphids or insects. And you'll typically just see a lot of ants. I mean, that would be the main thing. And you'll see a lot of these non-biting brown, blackish ants. And so Argentine ants can be really difficult to get rid of and can be problematic in that way, because they basically are like protecting these problematic insects on your plants, and they're moving a lot of weed seeds around. So they're also basically planting weeds. So they're kind of difficult to deal with. Usually it's like some kind of bait situation that you want to do. You have to do some bait situation with the ants, and then you have to deal with the aphid or scale problem. So kind of 1-2 situation. And You definitely want to check the base of the plant to see if you see any scale around or any of the aphids, because that's kind of where they put them. But usually there's like a pyrethrin or organic pyrethrin solutions that you can use. There's some certain bait products like taro and things like that. And there's also boric acid is used with them sometimes. There's even like, I know there's a biological control, Neemaseek. I think I mentioned this actually already, but Neemaseek is like a nematode that goes after the queen ants. It can potentially help too. So they can be very problematic. There's aphids, which we've touched on a bit. Aphids can exist outside of this ant harvesting situation, obviously. This is just the ant. These are the little aphids all zoomed in. Ants, in certain situations, the Argentine ants are protecting them, but also aphids just can exist on their own. And the syrphid fly larvae, they can eat them. You can, I believe you can buy syrphid fly beneficial insects, but usually if you are waiting, you know, like I was saying, you can wait for like a beneficial insect to show up on its own. You can use purchase beneficial insects like the ladybug, like Hector mentioned, or yeah, it just depends. But one thing is aphids are very attracted to the kind of soft new growth on the plants. So if you are fertilizing stuff, nitrogen fertilizers at least, encourage and stimulate that soft new growth. So you might want to lay off on the fertilizers because that might be creating this soft new growth, and that's in attracting the aphids. So, and even overwatering sometimes can lead to aphids because, you know, just initially because of the little extra boost of water and growth that might come from it. And they like that soft new growth. So that would be a cultural thing you might want to change. But of course, yeah, there's lady beetles. There's also the soap that I mentioned, which is just any mild soap, but there are insecticidal soaps, but essentially it's just kind of like a very mild soap in water solution. And just getting that on them. And I like to like mush it all in and kind of smash them a bit at the same time. And like I said, the break, also just like a really strong jet of water from the hose, just spray their asses off. And that's usually pretty good too, because like I was saying, they fall off, they don't actually crawl back up. And the thing is, the soap, what the soap's doing is it dries them out because they're soft-bodied insects. So it actually kind of desiccates them. So that's why I like to do both the jet water and the soap, kind of like to help. Okay, scale. Yes, we've talked about this. So again, scale. This one has an ant here, but they look kind of, they just look like strange little bumps usually along the plant stem or the base of the plant, wherever you're seeing them. But they are these kind of hard-shelled insects, and they seem quite stationary, which the adults basically are, and the young ones are more mobile and not as hard-shelled. So similar to the aphids, you do need to like use some kind of soap. With the young ones, with that soft-bodied shell or soft body, you just can do the soap directly. But when you have the scale like this, which is the adult ones with the hard shell, they're kind of hard to remove. Basically, that hard shell protects them from the soap. So you have to use something to kind of like scrape them a bit, or you know, break that shell a bit. So that could just be like a stick that you rub on it, or sandpaper, or a toothbrush, or like your fingernail. It really depends what they look like, because they kind of can look different. And then add the soap. So that would be what you would do with scale. Okay, there's also thrips, which I think I know this photo is not the most clear, but this is actually a thrip. They're basically these kind of like little tiny black, long, slender insects that have little antennae that you can see. This is kind of identifies them. They have these little antennae and they have wings, but they also are, I mean, all of the ones we've discussed so far, aside from the ants, but all of them are basically sucking the sap out of the plant, and that's how they're problematic. These ones are doing the same, and they create this kind of like stippling and silvery, splotchy pattern on the leaf, and you find them on the underside. You'll find them on the underside of the leaf, and you want to make sure you actually kind of find an example or evidence of the thrip, because this stippling a lot of different things can kind of look like that. even like spider mites. But a giveaway would be you actually see a thrip like this, these tiny guys. But also this like black sticky stuff is the frass. So it's the poop of the thrip. And obviously the stippling and whatnot. And like some of this white stuff is also, I think, like the frass of it and whatnot. So, you know, you always want to identify what's going on, because this kind of silvery stippling can also happen with the spider mites, like I was saying. But with the spider mites, you'll actually see like a webbing, and with the thrips, you don't. So generally speaking, though, thrips, like it causes this damage, but it's not going to kill the plant. Like it's usually pretty tolerable. So you might want to remove the leaves where they are infecting, where they're like, you know, feeding on, and like prune any damaged parts out. But you want to kind of avoid, they also like kind of fresh new growth. And so if you're seeing a problem, especially if you're seeing it on like a plant that's being hedged frequently, sometimes they like that new fresh growth around the, you know, hedging cuts. So that might be something you consider if it's a real problem or like a visual eyesore. You can remove just the damaged parts. And yeah, you can also just do like kind of some movement, kind of get like basically like a strong jet of water at the leaves during their active season, which is usually like spring and fall. So when it's really hot out, they're not usually a problem. And you can just kind of like move the leaves around so they really just can't get established. So that can also be something. I know there's like, I think it's called spinosad. It's like a kind of like a fermented, I think it's like a fermented bacteria or something that you can apply for them, that you can apply on the leaves, that apparently, you know, takes care of the thrips. But yeah, it can be an issue, cannot be an issue. Back to the spider mites, just because it can look like this. Again, you would see a webbing, but it also has this silvery kind of frassy, messy look. And you would see the webbing, very dense webbing. And that one, you want to make sure you remove the webbing if you find it. And you can do that with like alcohol, like rubbing alcohol on a paper towel and just wipe it off. And that way you can, yeah, that's really, you know, just have to remove it really. Okay, there's mealybug. Wait, what time am I at? Okay. I think I'm going okay, time-wise. Okay, mealybug mealybug is basically, one individual looks like this picture, the larger picture, they're kind of like a oval shaped insect that has this like white waxy covering all over it. It says it looks like a slender snowflake, but I really disagree. I find them to be like really gross. I don't know why, but they like kind of, usually you don't see it as one individual. Actually, you see it in kind of masses. They look like these gross cottony masses. Here's kind of an example. You can see it's just like a big patches of them, because it's actually like a whole group of them. Mealybugs are similar to scale and aphids and a lot of the other ones, in that they kind of are sucking the sap from the plant. And you have to, you know, so you can do the forceful jet of water and spray them off. But you got to really get in nooks and crannies. Sometimes they're in the root systems even, and sometimes they're just really nooked in, even behind. I've seen them kind of like almost behind like the bark, or, you know, like basically the bark of plants. But yeah, I mean, it's not hard to miss, I guess. They're pretty identifiable. And with these ones, you would use the soap too. You can use a strong jet of water, follow it with the soap a bit. Just make sure you really get it into the nooks and crannies, because they kind of hide there. And is there something else I wanted to mention on this? If they have ants that are guarding them, you want to also manage for the ants, obviously. They're just like the scale and aphids. Yeah. Then we have bark beetles. So there are like thousands of types of bark beetles. There's just tons of them. This is just nondescript bark beetle. They're essentially, what they do is they bore into the bark or wood of the tree, or, you know, usually a wooded species. And you can see the kind of small holes where they kind of dig in. And this is like where they're tunneling through. You've removed the bark and you can see that. The problem is a lot of times they carry diseases in their mouth parts. And also this tunneling can actually both be a disease, or just the tunneling itself can kind of stop the flow of nutrients in the trunk of the plant. So that phloem and xylem, I don't know if you remember that from whatever science or botany or something, but the movement of nutrients and water through the plant, they kind of can stop that process and cause havoc. They're very small. This is a matchstick, so they're usually quite small, and you usually just see evidence like holes in the bark or this tunneling. I think I have a slide of a more specific one, but they can be very problematic because you don't want them to spread to other areas. If you do have bark beetles and you're seeing evidence of it, you want to remove whatever infected limbs you find. So if you find this tunneling, you want to remove them and dispose of them on site. That might be chipping it, burning it if you can in your area, but you could even solarize them like chunks, but you don't want to leave them whole. You want to dispose of it somehow on site because it can pass to other wooded species. So there is no chemical control really for bark beetles, and usually it's too late anyway. Like once you see the damage, they're long gone. So it's important to just, also I think that they found that they are attracted to well-watered trees. So maybe encouraging you not to water, like be super generous with the watering on your trees. And also make sure you keep this material, especially if you're cutting the wood, keep it away from like old woody growth areas, because things like this is the invasive shot hole borer, which is a type of bark beetle that is probably the most prevalent pathogenic beetle. Well, it itself is not pathogenic, but it carries the Fusarium dieback fungus in its mouth parts, and so it basically infects the tree with Fusarium dieback, which is basically a terminal illness for the tree. And but basically, it's exactly what I was saying a second ago, is that Fusarium stops the flow of water and nutrients within the trunk of the plant, and then basically the plant just slowly dies. And all of these images are basically evidence or visible response of the disease, which is like this staining. There's the gumming that happens. Here you can see the tunneling with this invasive shot hole borer, and then there's these kind of sugary volcanoes, they call them. And then this would be the frass. These are all kind of symptoms of invasive shot hole borer. If you see this is a bad sign, I would say. But you want to remove and act quickly so that it doesn't spread to other wooded areas or other trees of the same species. Really, I think this is mostly found in kind of box elder, California sycamore, Torrey pine, in terms of native plants, Torrey pines, coast live oak, and Palo Verde. That's where they've seen these. You basically same thing. You want to remove any infected parts. If you're seeing it only on certain trunks, remove those parts and dispose of them on site. Like I said, you want to chip it, burn it. You can solarize it. Make sure you're solarizing those. You can put it into chunks and tarp them, well with that kind of UV resistant, clear plastic. And if you are pruning any of this, definitely sterilize your tools, because that Fusarium dieback is a fungus that you can pass to other trees if you're cutting them with the same tool. So what else is there to say about this? I guess just I don't know. I guess that's it really. But there's also the gold-spotted oak borer, which is has a different. Basically, if you are wondering if you have a bark beetle, definitely use the UCIPM website. They have a chart that has like the beetle and the type of damage it does and pictures, so you can identify which one, because there's so many. But the gold-spotted oak borer is one that I know is affecting coast live oaks, particularly in San Diego County, but I know it's happening in Southern California. And again, these are both invasive bark beetles that kind of show up with the diseases, and it's terminal for these trees. So you want to make sure you're, I guess like the PSA is, don't travel with your like firewood and don't move wood around. I believe the gold-spotted oak borer actually came on like a firewood truck from Arizona. And it's literally, that's why you want to dispose of it on site. You don't want to like put it in the green bin and then drives all across the county and potentially spreads. Okay, there's
Can I ask you a question about, like, have you seen this bug that grows on on the cactus? And cochineal, and it turns red. I mean, they don't really, I want to ask what you think, because I feel like they don't really bother the cactus too much.
Yeah, they're not a problem. And, in other cultures, they actually use that dye and totally, harvest that beetle. I believe it's a beetle, like, or what's it called, entomology wise. But yeah, I think it's much more a aesthetic thing. So if someone's like, I don't like the way that looks, then you can do something about it. But otherwise, yeah, it's really not, they've evolved kind of together, so they can like thrive on the plant. I do notice it. I mean, I don't know, I can't say that I've read this somewhere and it's official, but I notice that I see it more often on like very densely thatched kind of cacti, that I feel like have a little less airflow. But ones that are like, but again, I'm just speaking from like my own particular experience, but I can't say that that's the case. But yeah, it's not, I don't see them like a cactus die from it, they just are on it. But yeah, it's not necessarily a problem. Oh, okay, right. So rust is, I always mean to change this picture because it just doesn't do anything for me. And I'm sure it doesn't do anything for you guys either. But rust is just kind of this big term for a big group of fungi. And it can be like this color, but it can also be like different textures, like any fungus. There's a lot of variability in the way they look, and they can be kind of gelatinous-y to like more powdery. And also they can be anything from like orange, yellow, red to black or gray. And, there's a lot of different variations. They can have fruiting bodies or not. And typically rust species are kind of specific to a host. So if you have rust in one plant, it doesn't mean it's going to spread to your whole garden. It might be just that one species that it's specific to, but sometimes it's specific to multiple species. Like there is a cedar apple rust, which goes from like junipers to toyon and back and forth. So if you have that rust and you have those two plants, then yes, it can spread between them, but it's not necessarily going to spread to your sage or something like that. So it is kind of host specific usually. And typically you see rust on the like broad-leafed, more broad-leafed plants. And there's like, you can apply sulfur. There's sulfur kind of powders or even spray solutions that you can apply that usually kind of stops the spread of it, but it doesn't like remove it completely. So it just stops the spread. And you can spray the sulfur preventatively if you've had issues with rust. You can spray it before it shows up. But usually you just want to kind of break the pattern, which is defoliating, like removing any of the leaves that have the rust on it, because I mean, it can be passed, like via like water droplets, it can pass over. Even honeybees that like walk in it can actually pass it to other plants. But again, it kind of has to be host specific. So there are plant resistant varieties. Like it just very much depends on the situation that you have. What was I, is there something? Oh, well, also I think rust, with rust, if you're having an issue with rusts, you want to avoid wetting the leaves. So again, it's usually forming on the leaf part. That's why I kind of hate this picture, but it's usually like some kind of fungal thing on the leaf, on a wide, broad leaf. So that's where you would avoid watering the leaves overhead, or at least water in the morning so that the leaf has plenty of time to dry, and don't water late in the afternoon when the leaves are going to stay wet all night. So in the case of rust, they definitely need moisture to germinate. Then there are waterborne diseases. There are lots of different types of waterborne diseases. One main one, I guess we're just going to highlight, is Phytophthora, which is a soil pathogen. This is actually, I learned that it's not a bacteria or a fungus. It's actually more, they call it a water mold. And it's actually more closely related to like brown algae or something. It's not actually a fungus or a bacteria. But that being said, Phytophthora is very contagious, and it can also live in your soil for a very long time. And it's basically the cause of root rot and crown rot on plants. And the conditions it needs to actually like do its thing and cause a problem is swampy, wet conditions and poor drainage. It just needs to be water, standing water, or sopping soil water, or what is that? What am I trying to say? Sopping soil. for a certain amount of hours, and then it can actually thrive. And basically what you see is this picture like on the right. It's just usually you see the plant leaves start to wilt, turn black and fall off, and the plant just like looks horrible and basically dies. And it really, yeah, it's really kind of your watering techniques. If you do have phytophthora in your soil, it doesn't, it's not a death sentence. It's just about making sure that you water appropriately and don't overwater. And that's the main one with Phytophthora. I think if I had, I don't think there's no chemical or anything you can use. There's no solution aside from cultural practices. So irrigating appropriately. There's also, I think I have a note here that I wanted to. I have something about oak root fungus. Oh, well, and I guess, yeah, there is kind of, but this kind of goes hand in hand. We've kind of mentioned this. The trees that are, or plants that are more stressed are going to be more susceptible to disease. So again, if you're overwatering a plant that's already kind of stressed out, you're just kind of adding more and more risk factors. Okay, then there is powdery mildew, which is different from rust. It is a kind of fungi, but it is usually these kind of white gray kind of patches, this powdery look on the leaves. And this one is actually not, it doesn't need water to germinate. It actually kind of favors warm, dry days and warm, dry conditions. It does thrive when there's low air circulation though. So if you have a lot of plants that are, planted very tightly together, they can be more susceptible to powdery mildew. And definitely I've noticed this, and I know like last class, I actually confirmed on the IPM website that drought stressed plants are more susceptible. And I've definitely noticed that, even especially with vegetable gardening, seeing powdery mildew show up with the plants that are more drought stressed. So it becomes more susceptible. There's you can use like a baking soda solution on the leaves. That can somewhat work. I would say mostly make sure you're not drought stressing your plants, like watering them appropriately and the right spacing so there's good air circulation. You can wash it off, in the morning, because the water actually doesn't, in this case, doesn't help it germinate. I think you can use sulfur for this also, but and one of the main ones that people say, like you probably hear this the most frequent with powdery mildew, is using like a milk solution on them. So you spray like, something like a third milk, 2/3 water or something on the leaves, and actually do it on a very hot day. And that actually controls the powdery mildew. But it should be obvious, it stinks like hell because you're putting some milk and water on a hot day on leaves. So it doesn't smell great, but it does work. Putting it, definitely want to put it on a not hot day, but bright sun. So it needs to be applied like that. So, okay. I think lastly, let me see, because I want to get to the website. Basically, yeah, these are kind of IPM that basically they want to, when you're going to implement some IPM, like when you're implementing a program, it's like you have to have a plan in place. And every plan or program, they call it, has these 6 things. This is all in your outline, but essentially it's just, again, like I said, IPM is very like methodical. And this is just like, what's your plan? What does it look like? And it should always have these components, which we've already talked about, but essentially like pest identification. Make sure you're actually identifying the pest. Is it a pest in this case scenario, or is it just an insect that's part of the wildlife? You know what I mean? So identifying your pests appropriately. Then there's monitoring and assessing the actual pest numbers and whatever their damage is. And again, this kind of comes into play with that threshold. Like, do I need to, well, first you want to just monitor them and check them regularly. Like, how many pests am I seeing? Is it a lot? Is the damage really considerable? Can I wait on this and let this happen, like, go for another season? Or can I wait for the natural predators to show up? Can this just recover on its own? That sort of thing. So definitely taking your good notes and, making sure that you're just monitoring the pest situation initially. And then then this is the threshold thing. So have some kind of threshold or guidelines for when you actually take action when you have a pest. Of course, we always want to encourage you to be slow about it with IPM and taking really good notes about what you're seeing, because sometimes, especially if you're like letting kind of nature take its course and like being patient about it, you might notice that things improve on their own, or potentially like notice certain areas of the garden don't have the problem, and maybe like certain combination of natives reduce that problem. Like I'm thinking buckwheats, for example, which are really great for beneficial insects. They attract a lot of beneficial insects. Maybe you'll find like, hey, this same plant, but that has a lot of buckwheat neighbors is not having this problem. So maybe I just need to plant more buckwheats and this would like kind of balance this out. Or the kind of case of Asclepias, which is milkweed, which is, it attracts a lot of aphids, and that's totally fine and normal. That's part of it. It doesn't bother the monarch butterflies or their larvae or their caterpillars that come from it. So it's just part of the process. Like you're planting milkweed so that it can be decimated by the caterpillars and the aphids in the end. So the aphids actually attract the milkweed. The aphids that are on the milkweed actually attract beneficial insects too. So yeah, sometimes it's just about, is this the time to act? And then prevention, always trying to take steps before something becomes a problem. And yeah, just taking steps before something's an issue, like making sure you're doing the plant spacing appropriately, irrigating appropriately, mulching, things like that. And then when you are, making a plan, if you are implementing some kind of management tool or strategy, not relying on any singular one, you want to make sure that you're doing a combination of all the different strategies and like kind of have this multi-pronged approach, because that's going to be most effective in the long term. And then lastly, you just want to assess whatever damage, pest management, I guess. So it's like, what's the damage you did, which is maybe it just take care of your problem, or are you noticing that you have a lot less pollinators flying around, or anything. You want to make sure with IPM that you're taking into account the whole habitat and all of the kind of organisms in the habitat. So what did my strategy or my pest management strategy, what did that do to the rest of the environment, not just the plant that I was kind of trying to deal with? I'm going to is this important? No, I'm going to skip this one to get to this thing. It's just about weeding. That's something you can offer people. I want to talk about this. This website is on your, I guess I'll just go to it. This is the UCIPM website. This is just like, it's like, I feel like YouTube for plant dorks, and you can just go down the rabbit hole of this. And there are so many resources here that you can look into. You can, one of the ones I want to highlight is here. You go here, and then yes. So they have this diagnostic tool, which is really great. Ooh, actually though, I think I had an example in my, yeah. So this is just an example. You guys probably know this from even the slides themselves, but just for the sake of this diagnostic tool I want to use, this is a sage. This is actually culinary sage, not a native sage, but this is a sage, and it has this like white substance on it. So just to kind of showcase how you can use the diagnostic tool.
Claire, can you paste the links on the chat?
Yes, I will do that. Let me, oh wait, I'll do it after I do the tool. Is that cool? Yeah, I'll do it. Make sure to remind me if I forget, because then I have to like, end the slideshow and the whole thing. But there is the first one definitely in your outline if you're like, if I do forget. But just real quick through this, oh, my internet's a bit slow. Okay, so the way this diagnostic tool, if I wanted to use that sage example, you really just go through this process of elimination, and then the website shows you what it thinks is its best guess for what's going on, which is really helpful for narrowing things down. This is a kind of simple one, and I'm using it as an example, but here you just pick what type of plant it is, and flower, this is fruit trees, nuts, berries, vegetables, melons, or tree or shrubs. And then you just pick which one it is. You can pick multiple, whatever fits. I'm going to say it's just a tree and a shrub. I could also put flowers, but I'm not going to, because just for the sake of this. And then it has all the list of different plant names. They have them by genus and also by some genus, some with genus and common name, it's a little frustrating because some of them, it doesn't have the genus for, but it has just the common name. So check both if you know both. I know it's a type of sage, which is a salvia. I'm going to go down to sago palm, rosemary, sage. They also, you can see, have salvia. So it's honestly, they're the same. So I'm just going to pick salvia. I could also pick and sage, but again, just for the sake of this. Then you go to the plant parts part. So again, we're just kind of narrowing this down for the tool. And it tells you the different plant parts that are being, you just choose which part is being affected. So I know in this case, it's the leaves. Obviously, don't look at the images. The icons aren't very helpful. And I add this to my list. But if it was affecting the whole plant or the shoots, you just click what is appropriate. And then lastly, it asks you to identify what kind of damage it is. I really recommend not looking at the photos because sometimes they can be misleading because it maybe looks a little bit different. Just go by what the words say. So these are all damage on leaves because I clicked leaves. So here it says curled, cupped, folded, rolled, twisted. The leaves weren't in that image I showed. Deformed, distorted, dwarfed, no. Discolored, necrosis, chlorosis, no, not discolored. And drop, clinging to branches, no. There's galls, swelling, or rough. That's not the case. Then there's powdery, cottony growth. That sounds about right. So I'm going to add that to my list, and you can check the rest. There's specks, flecks, dots, stippled, spores, pustules, blisters, spots. Well, all these horrible words. But you can see that here on the bottom of the like kind of narrowing down is the results, and it has already narrowed it down to 1. Sometimes, obviously, it narrows it down to more. But here I was able to narrow it down to 1, and sure enough, it's powdery mildew. So it's really great resource because it basically gives you some images. They're not always going to be native plants, of course. Some images of what it looks like, and then it tells you what it is basically and how to identify it. So it gives you some cool tools because sometimes you might have multiple options on your diagnostic tool and be like, oh, I'm not sure if it's powdery mildew or X, Y, and Z. So it gives you some ways to recognize it. So it says powdery mycelial spore growth, blah, 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 and what the damage looks like. And then it tells you the life cycle, which can be really helpful for controlling it. And then they give you like the management, like what is the best practices here. And they say the best management is control, method of control is prevention. So in this case, it says don't plant susceptible cultivars. And these are all these, they have basically listed a bunch of non-native species because the website's not just for natives, it's for landscaping and gardening in California. So you can see it says susceptible plants, and then there's resistant cultivars that are on here. And then they'll give you the different management practices you can use. So it could be cultural. This is a chemical one. Fungicide would be a chemical application. So there's multiple different management strategies. And that's the whole point with IPM, is to utilize all of them and start with the least kind of toxic one. So you might want to be prevention, then cultural. So it says shade and moderate temperature favor most powdery mildews, blah, blah, blah. You guys can get into this. But it tells you all the different things you can try. So let me go back to, I want to, how come he went, there it is. I wanted to cut and copy this, like I said I would, into the chat.
Oh, I found it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, either way, I'll put it in there. And then this one is just a direct link to the diagnostic tool, but I'll do that too, just while I'm at it. And yeah, this is a really great resource. And that's why I will just go to the homework slide real quick before I run out of time. The homework that's listed on your outline is this first one. But before, I would really want to encourage you to do the other one, which is why I said, or you don't have to do both of them. I'm just giving you the opportunity because I think this second one, which is basically use the website like I just did to diagnose a pest or some issue or investigate some issue you've been seeing in the garden and note what kind of IPM strategies to manage it. So basically, I'm giving you the opportunity to just like use the website, the diagnostic tool, or the website at all to tell me what you're seeing in your gardens. Because I think the tool is so useful, and like I want to encourage you to play with it if you want to. But the other homework is basically a lot more boring, but it's basically reviewing this 12-month calendar that's in your workbook. It's on page 138. And it's a very generic kind of calendar of like monthly maintenance. Here's like the paper version. You'll see it just looks like a calendar with the different, what's it called? Different activities to do in the garden, like planting, irrigation, all these things. And what you want to do is go to the pest control portion and note any discrepancies that you might have with the calendar, because the calendar is not like end all be all. So noting anything that might be different than what you have experienced in your own gardening or landscaping. So like I said, it's either or. I really recommend the second one because it's more fun for me too. Because I actually learn from what everybody submits. It's super interesting because a lot of times it's pests that I haven't dealt with. So that's your homework. I think just before I finish, I had this, I wanted to mention, so they also have a search function in the UC IPM where say you like, I don't know, you like go to Theodore Payne and you talk to Tim Becker, who's the horticultural director, and you show him this picture of your manzanita. And he's like, oh yeah, that's just a manzanita leaf gall. And maybe you're just feeling a little too nervous to be like, okay, yeah, but what is that? What do I do about it? Maybe you know what the pest is, but you don't know how to manage it. You can actually use the search function and just type it in. And I did this, and this is the link for that one. And you can see this is the same damage that I was showing in the picture. And this just tells you about the manzanita leaf gall aphid, which is not problematic and really doesn't do anything. They don't, well, they have some solutions if you really want to get rid of them, but they are pretty tolerable. And if they're not, they tell you to do something about it. So just wanted to point that out. And I think that's it. Is there any questions? So we only have like 10 minutes left or a little less than that. Can
you go back to the homework slide?
Yes. Let me go back to, there we go. So really just do whichever homework I guess is more interesting to you, because it'll probably be more interesting to me that way. So other than that, please, yeah, feel free to ask whatever questions. But next week it will be the last two classes. Tuesday's class will be pruning, and then Friday's class will be kind of like putting it all together, the last class. And then that Saturday, which is after the Friday class, is the optional pruning workshop that I was highly recommending to everyone. So any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks for hanging in there. Wait, Hector, what's the cool pen looking gopher trap?
I think I'll send you the link.
Yeah,
right
I'm
here.
curious.
I was pen, but it's like a sensor type thing, but it's not really a sensor. You just plug it in and it doesn't kill it.
Oh, it doesn't kill it. Is it
No.
Is it the sound one?
No, it looks
Okay.
like it, but it grabs it by the neck, and you see like when it gets it, it goes.
Oh wow.
Once it goes in, you just pull it up, and it's either alive or dead, or you just do whatever you want with it.
Okay. Yeah. The cinch trap is sort of similar in that it's like, it kind of has like, it basically is like, so if it's kind of like an opening like this that snaps together. So if the gopher moves into it, it like gets around the neck, and it's supposed to, it does kill them. I mean, I've seen it maybe where it didn't, but very rarely.
That one you put it on top of the, ground
The
level.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about, but the one I'm talking about is you put them in the hole.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay.
Entrance of the hole.
Okay.
How much is that?
The one
Oh,
that
sorry,
Hector's
it says-
talking about?
It says it there, never mind.
Are you talking about the one that Hector's talking about or the cinch trap?
No, I see the price for this one now.
Yeah, this one is the cinch trap is sort of similar in price.
Yeah. It has a video on the bottom if you want to show it.
Yeah, let's
Kind of
see.
interesting.
Wait, where is the video? There it is.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, I don't have my sound available, but
Is it
maybe you
a
guys
one-
will.
Is it a one-time use or you can use it multiple times?
I'm not sure. But look,
Wow.
yeah.
This is new to me.
Yeah.
I don't think you guys can hear it, but because I didn't put my sound on for videos on this Zoom. So there he's talking, but that's interesting.
So Claire, the one that is in your presentation was the one you highly recommend as like very effective?
I say, yeah, the cinch trap and also the Victor trap I personally have a lot of success with. And the difference I would say though, with the cinch trap and the Victor trap is the cinch trap you put in the hole and you leave the hole unburied. So basically, you know, there's a mound and you find the hole and you just stick the cinch trap in it. And there's that big square part that you kind of saw that's sticking out of the hole. And basically the gopher sees the light and is like, oh, I got to cover up this hole. And it goes towards it and it gets trapped in it. And then the Victor trap is the similar, but you actually put the Victor trap further down in the hole and you cover the hole completely and make sure no light's getting it. And but they work similarly, but just one you put in the hole, like basically they call it the, I think it's like the tunnel, so there's a hole that goes up to the surface of the soil and then you usually find like the real highway down below. So the Victor trap you want to put in the highway down below, and the cinch trap you want to just put in the kind of tunnel that's coming up to the surface soil. And I really recommend, if you want tips on gopher, I love talking about this. Like I said, it's my secret talent. But if you really want to have success with them, put your traps out like dawn and dusk, because that's when they're the most active, and definitely put it in a fresh hole. So like see that the hole has got fresh soil around it. Don't put it in old holes. They're not going to be there. And check them frequently, you know, like go the next morning or the next dusk or whenever, and check to see if it's there and just change it out, because they're actively moving around. And usually they're actually pretty solitary territorial species. So a lot of times you'll see a ton of damage and it's just from one gopher, especially in a residential area, or maybe two. And so if you can get that one, you actually can really help with the damage. And that's what main things I would recommend. I'm really curious about this gopher hawk thing now. Thank you, Hector, for sharing.
I wanted to ask you about squirrels, because like I had like this one squirrel in my backyard, like, you know, they're so annoying, like, you know, but it eats all my vegetables. I'm pretty sure it does. And I try to look for a trap, but the traps online are like $50 to $100 for one trap.
That's true. You know, the traps are pretty expensive. They are pretty effective too for squirrels. They're like, if you get one, like you can get like several in one trap. Harbor Freight has traps for sort of cheaper than online. I've seen they kind of have cheaper, not like substantially, but maybe like $20 or $30 cheaper in a lot of cases. But yeah, traps can be pretty expensive, but they are in the long run kind of more helpful. There are some, I'm forgetting the name, but I know with vegetable gardening, we tried this product that's kind of like a repellent, and I am forgetting the name of it, but it's basically a bunch of aromatic, really strong smelling, this like granular thing that you put around and it repels them. It's not nearly as effective as a trap, but it did work in certain instances. And maybe as like a multi-pronged approach, you could get one of those. And the repellent is totally non-toxic. It's just a repellent, and it's like basically just a lot of really strong aromatics that keep them at bay. But yeah, squirrels are really tenacious, and especially with vegetables, because of course it's a food source. So
is that the squirrel cakes?
What was that?
The squirrel cakes?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, there's like, but isn't there a brand that has, I'm trying to remember, but they're like but yeah, they do come in like, well, I've seen them as a granular dust and also broken up into like pieces, almost like those like abuelita chocolate things I'm thinking of. I don't know why I'm thinking of that, but I'm not sure if you want to share which ones you used. or anyone, if anyone wants to share what they've used. I mean, we
You
all
can
learn
buy
from
those,
each
you
other.
can buy those at Lowe's. I think they're like $10 or so.
Are they the non-toxic repellent ones?
Yeah, they're almost like corn. It's a mixture.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's like a granular corn food thing,
Right,
but
like
it's got, yeah.
sunflower, peanuts and stuff like that.
Mm,
Well, good for rabbits too, chipmunks.
right, yeah.
You could also try peanut butter with cayenne pepper. You mix it, you leave little balls all over your vegetable garden.
Ooh,
When they come to eat, you train them to know that, ooh, I don't want to go in this area. Everything in here, it's spicy. So it's more
nice.
like a training them when they eat the peanut butter with the cayenne pepper, they just stay away from that area.
I
And if you
love
put it
that.
all over your garden, it works for all over your garden. It's not an overnight thing, but
Yeah,
we did have a good we started seeing less and less of them coming into our yard to eat the fruits.
yeah. A lot of the techniques are going to be like, yeah, it's multi-pronged, it's like you kind of, I think it's a lot of times like thinking like they do and then trying to make it unhospitable. So like, yeah,
Yeah.
the peanut butter that tastes spicy, they're like, I don't really like that. I'll just go somewhere else. So making
Yeah,
it less convenient to be in your garden.
right.
they
And the
don't-
peanut butter they love, so
Right.
they're gonna come, but they'll learn that it's not a good thing in that garden.
Yeah, like this place has spicy peanut butter for some reason. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they don't like the white pepper, black peppers, or the garlics.
Okay, good. Yeah, a lot of the aromatic stuff, really strong smelling stuff,
Yeah.
like chili, all that stuff, they're not a fan of because they definitely want the kind of like your like nice tasty veggies. Anyway, it's 7.